No invisible aircraft, no radar blip, no warning. Yet bunker after bunker in one of the most defended cities on Earth was being surgically destroyed in total silence. That night in 1991, in a bunker beneath Baghdad, it felt like the laws of physics had just broken. Imagine you are staring at a wall of radar screens that represent everything you know about war, technology, and survival. Then, one by one, the red lights of critical command centers start turning on, destroyed, while your screens insist that the sky is completely empty. No bombers, no missiles, no contacts. Just nothing. Would you trust your eyes, or your instruments? And what if both are wrong? Tonight, you and I are going inside that bunker, inside that mystery, and inside the secret that quietly ended the Cold War. The ghost over Baghdad, the invisible bomber. Before we dive in, if you love deep Cold War stories, hidden technology, and narrative-style breakdowns that feel like a movie, make sure you hit like, subscribe, and tap the bell icon so you never miss an episode. Now, let's step into the bunker. January 17, 1991, Baghdad. Deep below the city, in a concrete bunker chilled by overworked air conditioning, Colonel Mikhail Sarov, a Soviet air defense advisor, stood in front of a glowing wall of radar screens. The air smelled of stale smoke and hot electronics. Somewhere overhead, the capital of Iraq slept uneasily, wrapped in a fortress of Soviet-designed radar and missile systems that, on paper, could shred any Western air force that dared to approach. To Mikhail, this bunker was the nerve center of a masterpiece. Soviets seized 3 SA-6, hundreds of anti-aircraft guns, all tied together into a dense layered air defense network. It had a sophisticated French integrated command and control backbone, but its claws were pure Soviet steel. This system had one job: make the sky lethal. Right now, though, the sky over Baghdad was calm. On the long-range P-18 spoon rest radars, green lines swept the horizon in slow, rhythmic arcs. The operators were bored but tense. They knew the coalition's attack could come at any moment. Yet sweep after sweep showed nothing. No formations, no probing runs, not even a stray reconnaissance jet. Then, at 02:51 in the morning, reality flickered. The lights in the bunker dimmed, as if the building itself had taken a sudden breath. A faint, muffled thump rolled through the floor. More a pressure wave in the stomach than a sound in the ears. A few men glanced up, confused. Earthquake, misfire, power fluctuation. On the far wall, a status board updated with a brutal Simplicity 1 sector node. Altair Defense Sector Operations Center turned red. Hit. Mikhail's attention snapped from the ambient chatter to the screens. The radar scope still clear, silent, clean, no targets. In the corner, the Iraqi sector commander yelled into a phone, his voice cracking with panic. Mikhail shoved his own headset on and bypassed the local chain of command. He wanted the raw feed straight from the long-range radar station he trusted most. Status. He barked in Russian. The answer came back strained. Sky is clear, Comrade Colonel. No contacts. 0. It must be. Another impact, stronger. The floor jerked, dust drifted from the ceiling. This time, the overhead lights didn't just flicker. They died. For half a second, the nerve center of Baghdad's air defense was pitch black. Half a second where every man in that room felt very small. Then the emergency power kicked in, bathing everything in a sickly red glow. Screens rebooted. Consoles hummed back to life. Men shouted over each other in 3 languages. On the status board, 2 more green lights turned red. A key telecommunications hub, a major power station. The question no one wanted to voice became impossible to avoid. What is hitting us? Mikhail demanded an answer. The voice from the radar site cracked on the edge of terror. We don't know. The scopes are clean. There is nothing there. A moment like this doesn't just shake a person. It cracks an entire worldview. For Mikhail, a veteran of the Soviet Air Defense Forces, radar was not a suggestion. It was reality. If it appeared on the screen, it existed. If it didn't, it wasn't a threat. Electronic warfare. Sure. You could see jamming. It appeared as noisy bands, snow, false targets. You could fight noise. But this was not noise. This was absence. Perfect, pristine emptiness. And from that emptiness, something was peeling away Baghdad's nervous system with a surgeon's precision. Before we reveal what was actually in that empty sky, let's stay in that bunker a little longer. Because what happened next sent shockwaves all the way to Moscow. As more impacts rippled through the city, Mikhail began recognizing the coordinates being called out. This wasn't random bombing. The air defense headquarters, telecommunications switchboards, electrical substations, ventilation shafts of bunkers, antennas of specific radar sites. Someone out there was attacking Baghdad like a surgeon with a scalpel, not a bomber with a hammer. Iraqi operators started to break. Some left their consoles, others screamed into dead microphones, calling units that no longer existed. A few clung to procedures, trying to run checklists that suddenly felt like rituals from an extinct religion. Mikhail stood frozen for a moment, not out of cowardice, but out of pure cognitive shock. He had studied every American aircraft, the massive B-52, the agile F-16, rumors of strange new fighters. Nothing fit. A B-52 was a flying barn door, visible from hundreds of kilometers away. Even a nimble fighter would show up as sharp, fast-moving blips. And yes, there were whispers of an American stealth fighter. But even stealth wasn't supposed to be magic. Even the most advanced design would only reduce a radar signal, not erase it. Radar waves hit objects and bounce back. That's not politics. That's physics screens. The best the Soviet Union could export. Insisted that nothing was flying over Baghdad. Meanwhile, the city, a fortress he had helped design, was being carved apart with mechanical comm. That is the moment when this story stops being about Iraq and starts being about the Soviet Union. If you're still with this story right now, you're exactly the kind of viewer this channel is built for. Drop a comment telling, watching from Hey Your Country. And if you want more Cold War tech breakdowns like this, hit that like button. It genuinely helps bring these long-form investigations to more people. Now, let's jump from Baghdad to Moscow. In the hours and days that followed, the Soviet leadership received a stream of messages from their people embedded in Iraq. Those reports did not read like conventional battle updates. They read like science fiction. We are under attack from an unseen enemy. Radar systems fully functional. No targets detected. Critical nodes destroyed with surgical precision. Enemy appears to know exact coordinates of our key facilities. You can imagine the reaction in the Soviet General Staff. The Baghdad-Kari air defense system was not just an export package. It was a direct, simplified cousin of the massive PVO network that shielded the Soviet homeland. Same philosophy, same types of radars, same classes of missiles. If something could walk through Baghdad's shield as if it wasn't there, what did that mean for Moscow? For decades, Soviet strategy counted on one core assumption. Any large-scale raid B-52 bombers, cruise missiles, NATO aircraft would be seen in time to respond, to launch interceptors, to fire surface-to-air missiles, to activate nuclear retaliation if necessary. Mutually assured destruction depended on one thing: you could see the attack coming. The ghost over Baghdad rewrote that rule in a single night. If the Americans possessed an aircraft that could defeat this integrated shield, then suddenly the unthinkable became thinkable. A precision first strike on Soviet nuclear silos. Command bunkers hit before they could issue retaliatory orders. A leadership decapitated in the opening minutes. And no radar warning, no blips, no time. For Soviet planners, the problem wasn't that Iraq might lose a war. The problem was that the Soviet Union might already be naked without knowing it. This is when the hunt for the invisible one began. The Kremlin responded the way any superpower does when faced with something it doesn't understand. It created a special commission. In a secure facility outside Moscow, some of the best minds in radar theory, electronics and aerospace engineering were locked in a room and told, in polite bureaucratic language, explain the impossible. On one wall they had satellite photos showing precise, surgical bombing of hardened sites. On another wall they had radar logs from Baghdad showing no attackers. How do you reconcile? Something is being hit, with nothing is there to hit it. First theory, betrayal by hardware. Maybe the French command and control integration had a secret back door, a kill switch. Maybe Western-built electronics inside the Iraqi system had been sabotaged to shut down at the critical moment. Comforting idea. That would mean Soviet systems at home were still solid. Teams rushed to Soviet air defense sites nearer to NATO borders, checking for hidden viruses, compromised circuits, anything that suggested sabotage. They found nothing. Everything worked perfectly. Second theory, human failure. Perhaps the Iraqi operators panicked, misread their screens, or simply weren't up to the standard of Soviet crews. Easy to believe, easy to blame. So, they brought back the man who had been in that bunker, Colonel Mikhail Surov. He was interrogated, debriefed, questioned for hours in a windowless room. His message was simple, brutal, consistent. The system worked. The radar worked. The operators did their jobs. There was no signal to miss. I watched the scopes myself. The sky was clean. The most terrifying phrase he delivered wasn't about the enemy. It was about the system. It reported the truth. And the truth was that nothing was there. When a system that has always worked reports something impossible, and every test confirms the system is healthy, the problem is no longer in the software, or the training, or even the hardware. The problem is deeper. The physics you built your doctrine on may no longer apply. That's when the investigation turned outward. The GRU, Soviet military intelligence, was told to forget everything else and focus on one obsession: find this weapon. They activated agents across NATO, listening for rumors on air bases, hunting paperwork traces, maintenance logs, pilot rosters, strange fuel orders, anything hinting at a new aircraft. The rumors they picked up didn't match the ghost they were hunting. They heard of the B-2, flying wing, stealth bomber still in development, or a rumored hypersonic reconnaissance craft, maybe called Aurora. Interesting, but wrong. Those were different projects. Whatever had flown over Baghdad, it was low, slow, precise, and terrifyingly selective. Inside Soviet air defense circles, a legend started to grow, a nickname in Russian that captured the feeling perfectly: Nevidimka, the invisible one. Once you name a ghost, you start seeing it everywhere. Soviet fighter pilots flying MiG-29s and Su-27s began reporting tiny anomalies on their radars. Fleeting contacts on the outer edges of range that appeared for a single sweep and then vanished completely, not faded out, not moved away. Just gone. At a radar station in Siberia, one officer claimed that, for 3 nights in a row at exactly the same time, a hole moved slowly across his radar screen, an area where the normal background clutter disappeared, like a black spot sliding across a green ocean of noise. His superiors chalked it up to fatigue, maybe drinking, maybe equipment glitch. Officially, he was reprimanded. Unofficially, his report was quietly forwarded to the Special Commission. Patterns were beginning to form, but there was still no solid answer. The worst part: the more the Soviets tried to force the phenomenon into explanations they understood, the further they drifted from the truth, which led to 2 wild but serious theories. Theory 1: plasma stealth. Some physicists on the commission dusted off earlier Soviet research. What if the Americans had taken an experimental concept and turned it into a weapon? Imagine an aircraft flying wrapped in a cloud of ionized gas, plasma, surrounding the fuselage like a glowing cocoon, just not visible to the naked eye. Radar waves hitting this plasma would be absorbed or scattered before ever reaching the metal structure. To the radar, the plane wouldn't just be small, it would be gone. On the chalkboard, the math kind of worked. But the practical problem was enormous. Generating and sustaining that kind of plasma field would require staggering amounts of power. Some engineers joked that you'd need a small nuclear reactor on board just to switch it on. Still, when you're trying to explain the impossible, nearly impossible, suddenly feels reasonable. Theory 2: active cancellation. If plasma stealth was brute force, this idea was surgical genius. An aircraft equipped with an ultra-advanced electronic system could detect incoming radar waves, analyze them in tiny fractions of a second, and then emit its own return signal in perfect opposite phase. The original reflection and the generated signal would combine and cancel each other out, like 2 identical waves meeting and flattening. Result on the radar screen: nothing. For this to work, the onboard computers would need to be unbelievably fast, predicting, analyzing, and responding almost instantly. To the Soviet mind, that meant something even more terrifying than a new radar trick. It meant the Americans might have a level of computing power far beyond what Moscow believed possible. In their imagination, the invisible plane became a flying supercomputer, a digital predator, outthinking entire radar networks in real time. The truth, as it turned out, was different. But the fear those theories created was very real, and it pushed the Soviets into a frantic race to counter something they still didn't understand. If you're enjoying how deep we're going into both the tech and the psychology here, let this be your reminder to subscribe. Episodes like this take a lot of research and storytelling work, and your support makes future investigations possible. With no solid handle on what the invisible one was, the Soviet response fragmented into multiple frantic projects. One order to missile designers was blunt: if we cannot see it, we must hear it. Research began into massive acoustic arrays, fields of microphones meant to listen for the distinct sound signatures of jet engines. In theory, you could triangulate a very quiet, very stealthy aircraft by the unique pattern of its roar. Radar experts started looking at older, long wavelength systems like the P-18 spoon rest. These radars used meter-band waves, much longer than the short centimeter-band waves of fire control radars. The thinking was, longer waves might resonate with the larger structure of the stealth plane, especially edges like tail fins and wingtips, revealing its presence. On paper, that prediction held some water. In practice, the result was maddening. The long-wave radar could sometimes detect a faint, smeared patch of something in the sky, a fuzzy suggestion that something stealthy might be there, but it couldn't provide precise speed, altitude, or heading. It was like hearing a floorboard creak in a dark house. You know someone is inside, but you have no idea where, or how many, or how close. To actually shoot anything down, the system needed to pass targeting data to a high-frequency engagement radar, the kind used to guide missiles. And the moment that high-frequency radar lit up the sky, the stealth aircraft's geometry did exactly what it was designed to do. It deflected those waves away from the receiver. The target disappeared again. They were trapped in a cruel paradox. The long-wave radar could whisper, "Something is out there somewhere." With the short-wave radar, needed to actually fire, saw nothing. Next attempt brute force detection from the air. The mighty MiG-31 interceptor, with its powerful phased array, Zaslon, radar was pushed forward as a possible answer. Maybe, just maybe, if you blasted enough energy into the sky, even the tiniest reflection off a stealth aircraft could be teased out from the noise. But the radar cross-section of the new American jet, effectively the size of a metal marble, was so small that even the MiG-31's powerful beam couldn't cleanly separate its echo from atmospheric clutter. Once again, the Soviets found themselves in a position they weren't used to. They understood the rough principles of the enemy's advantage, and still had no practical way to defeat it. They were wrestling with a ghost. Meanwhile, the source of that ghost was flying countless practice runs in a place the Soviets could not see. To really understand why Baghdad's defenses failed, we have to leave Moscow and fly, metaphorically, over the Atlantic, across the United States, and into the dry, empty high desert of Nevada. There, on a patch of land labeled on some maps simply as Groom Lake, was a base that officially did not exist. Its insiders called it the Ranch. Officially, it was just another Air Force facility designation, Plant 42, part of a shadowy world of black-budget projects. This was the home of Lockheed's Advanced Development Projects Division, the legendary Skunk Works. The Skunk Works was not a normal aerospace engineering office. It was more like a cult of problem solvers, operating with extreme secrecy and almost religious devotion to one principle: small, focused teams solve impossible problems faster than giant bureaucracies. Its founder Clarence Kelly Johnson had already given the U.S. the U-2 spy plane and the SR-71 Blackbird, aircraft that looked like science fiction when they first appeared. By the mid-1970s, leadership of Skunk Works had passed to Ben Rich, who maintained that same culture. Minimal meetings, maximum responsibility, and a stubborn refusal to accept a possible as an answer. And the problem the US military handed to this cult: defeat the wall. The wall wasn't a literal structure. It was the kind of integrated air defense system the Soviets had perfected and exported. Dense layers of radar, overlapping missile engagement zones, coordination networks as thick as barbed wire across the sky. After the 1973 Yom Kippur War, when Soviet-made SAMs savaged the Israeli Air Force, the Pentagon woke up to a hard reality. Their current approach, fast, high-altitude bombers, would not survive against a mature Soviet-style defense network. You could not just fly better through that wall. You had to find a way to make the wall irrelevant. When DARPA quietly asked for something new, they didn't ask for a plane that was harder to see. They asked for something practically insane for the time. Build us a plane that is, for radar, effectively invisible. Here's the twist: the key to building that invisible aircraft didn't come from an American genius. It came from an obscure Soviet physicist whose paper the Soviet military itself had dismissed. Back in 1962, a Soviet physicist named Pyotr Fimsev published a dense, math-heavy paper with a very dry title about edge waves and diffraction theory. To most people, it looked like pure academic work, more about equations than airplanes. His main insight was subtle but revolutionary: the way radar waves reflect off an object depends not just on its size, but critically on the shape and orientation of its edges. Soviet defense officials looked at his work and decided it had no clear immediate military use. They didn't classify it. They let it be translated and published openly. Years later, in the United States, a radar specialist at Skunk Works named Dennis Overholser came across that paper. He wasn't an aerodynamicist. He didn't care how pretty a plane looked or how smoothly it flew. He cared about one thing: how radar waves bounced. Working with a computer expert, Bill Schroeder, he coded Ufimsev's equations into an early computer simulation, building a program that could predict an object's radar visibility based purely on geometry. The results were shocking. Every conventional aircraft shape, smooth curves, rounded surfaces, was essentially a very efficient radar reflector, like a polished curved mirror for radio waves. A lot of the energy bounced right back to the radar source. But what if, instead of smooth curves, you built an aircraft from a collection of flat panels, all sharply angled? The simulation revealed something almost absurd: sharp, flat facets, arranged correctly, would not absorb radar energy, but would deflect it away from the radar receiver in just a few narrow directions. From the front, such a shape might not look like a bomber or even like a bird. It might look, to the radar, like a tiny steel ball or even less. Overholser and Schroeder let the computer iterate on shapes. The resulting design looked ridiculous. It was a jagged, faceted wedge, like a crystal someone had carved with a blunt knife. Engineers nicknamed it the hopeless diamond. They built a scale model, mounted it on a pole, and tested it against radar. The radar operator thought the equipment had malfunctioned. The return signal was thousands of times weaker than any aircraft ever tested. The hopeless diamond was, for radar, almost nothing. They had cracked the invisibility part of the puzzle. But they had also created a new, equally serious problem. This shape was not meant to fly. Every aerodynamic instinct screamed that the hopeless diamond was a disaster. Its jagged panels and abrupt edges completely ruined the smooth airflow that keeps normal aircraft stable. If you built a full-sized version of it and just tried to fly it like a regular jet, it would likely tumble, stall, and fall out of the sky. So Skunk Works faced a hard choice: make the shape more aerodynamic and lose stealth performance, or keep the stealth and figure out how to make an unflyable shape fly. This is the point where America's advantage in computing changed the game. Around the same time, test programs like the F-16 were pioneering fly-by-wire technology. Instead of the pilot directly moving control surfaces via cables and hydraulics, the pilot's inputs went into a computer, and the computer moved the surfaces. Normally, this was a way to make already stable planes more responsive. But what if you flipped the idea? What if you built an aircraft that was inherently unstable, like a pencil balanced on its tip, and then used computers to continuously catch it, making thousands of adjustments every second? The Skunk Works team proposed a daring approach: build the stealth-optimized shape, then wrap it in a nervous system of redundant digital flight computers that would constantly fight its tendency to crash. In this arrangement, the pilot wouldn't fly the aircraft in the traditional sense. They would simply tell it where they wanted to go. The computers would do the frantic, microsecond-level work of keeping that radar-invisible brick in the sky. This fusion, F-117's equations plus cutting-edge microchips, produced one of the strangest, most consequential aircraft ever built, the F-117 Nighthawk. The F-117 program was buried under layers of secrecy, with codenames like Have Blue and Senior Trend. Test flights took place over the barren Nevada desert, often at night. Pilots selected for the program became, in a very real sense, ghosts. They couldn't talk about what they flew, couldn't be photographed with their aircraft, often flew at strange hours to avoid satellite overpass times. During the day, they blended into nondescript office buildings or contractor-covered jobs. At night, they climbed into black, angular machines that looked like alien artifacts, then vanished into the sky. The F-117 didn't carry its own radar. It would have given away its position. Instead, it depended on external sources for targeting data and used laser-guided bombs to deliver pinpoint strikes. Even its engine intakes and exhaust were sculpted for invisibility. Intakes were covered with fine mesh to hide the spinning compressor blades from radar. Exhausts were flattened and stretched to mix hot gases with cooler air, reducing infrared signature. On top of its geometry, the aircraft wore a skin of radar-absorbent material, special coatings designed to soak up stray energy that the facets didn't already deflect. For nearly a decade, the F-117 fleet existed almost entirely in the shadows with rumors but no public proof. Pilots practiced attacking mock targets again and again, refining a doctrine built around one central idea: arrive unseen, strike once, vanish. While the Soviets obsessed over ideas like plasma cloaks and active cancellation, the real answer was quietly racking up flight hours over a place their satellites could only partially glimpse, and their analysts could not fully interpret. Then, in 1988, the United States did something no one expected. It told the world, sort of. On November 10, 1988, the Pentagon held a press briefing. In it, a U.S. official calmly acknowledged that the Air Force had developed and deployed a stealth aircraft. He gave its designation. And he showed a single, heavily edited, grainy image. In a secure room in Moscow, Soviet analysts pinned that photograph to a board. Silence. They weren't looking at a sleek sci-fi fighter. They were looking at a black, angular, almost monstrous collection of flat surfaces. It definitely didn't look like anything aerodynamic in their textbooks. Somewhere, someone in that room remembered F-117's 1962 paper. Soon, that paper was on the same table as the F-117 photo. The equations describing how facets could redirect radar energy matched the shape in the picture disturbingly well. The realization hit hard. The Americans had taken a theoretical Soviet idea that had been dismissed as a dead end, and they had solved the hardest practical problems around it. Not through better metallurgy or bigger engines, but through computing power and a different way of organizing innovation. For the Soviet military-industrial complex, the word that began haunting conversations wasn't stealth. It was computing. They could build rugged planes and powerful missiles. But building an aircraft that was intentionally unstable, that depended on constant digital correction to survive, that required an entire ecosystem of hardware, software, and trust in those systems that they had never fully developed. By the time the F-117 officially existed in public, the Soviets understood the principles. But understanding a principle and being able to field a weapon are two very different things. And in January 1991, the theory turned into horror movie reality over Baghdad. Operation Desert Storm lasted 43 days. For the Iraqi air defense system and for the Soviet doctrine behind it, The war was effectively lost in the first 43 minutes. F-117 spearheaded deep strikes against the most heavily defended, most critical targets: command bunkers, communications hubs, air defense centers, key bridges, and energy infrastructure. Let's put the impact in perspective. Not a single F-117 was lost to enemy fire. Thousands of surface-to-air missiles and anti-aircraft rounds were fired at coalition aircraft during the war. Where the F-117 force, a small fraction of the coalition fleet, flew over 1,000 sorties. Yet not one Nighthawk was shot down or even damaged by enemy defenses. These jets, which many engineers had once labeled unflyable, roamed some of the densest air defense zones in the world with near impunity. On the first night alone, F-117s hit a significant portion of Iraq's strategic target list, blinding and paralyzing much of the regime's ability to coordinate. Over the course of the campaign, that small group of stealth aircraft destroyed a disproportionate share of the high-value targets. For Baghdad's defenders, it was like being in a boxing match where your opponent was invisible, could hit you wherever they wanted, and your punches passed straight through them. For Moscow, watching from afar, this was something else entirely. It was the final exam of the Cold War, and the grade was not just fail, it was your whole model no longer works. On the surface, the Cold War often looked like a contest of numbers. Or how many tanks in Europe? Or how many warheads in silos? Or how many divisions, bombers, submarines? But the story of the invisible bombers over Baghdad exposed the deeper truth. It was, more fundamentally, a war of systems. The Soviet approach often relied on copying Western breakthroughs: atomic bombs, jet engines, microchips, then mass producing them and integrating them into vast, dense networks like the PVO air defense shield. The idea was brute strength and redundancy. If you build a thick enough wall, nothing gets in. The American system, as embodied by the Skunk Works, played a different game. Instead of trying to build a better wall, it asked, is there a way to make the wall irrelevant? The F-117 was born at the intersection of a Soviet theoretical paper, American microelectronics, but a small empowered engineering culture that could take massive risks and move fast. This was not just an aircraft. It was proof that America's innovation ecosystem could outmaneuver a numerically heavy, rigidly structured Soviet machine. You could copy a bomber design. You could steal microchip schematics. But you couldn't easily copy the culture and infrastructure that produced something as radical as the F-117s: a stealth, optimized, inherently unstable, fly-by-wire strike aircraft that made entire generations of air defense hardware functionally obsolete overnight. When those black angular shapes slipped through Baghdad's air defenses, they didn't just destroy physical targets. They tore down an illusion, the illusion that the Soviet Union was, militarily and technologically, on equal footing. Back in that bunker, at the moment when Colonel Mikhail Surov watched his perfect radar scopes show a perfect empty sky while his city absorbed invisible hammer blows, he wasn't just seeing a new weapon. He was seeing the arrival of a new era. The ghost in his machine was not a supernatural presence. It was the future, arriving early. A future where information, computing, and clever geometry could defeat ton after ton of steel. A future where smaller, smarter forces could bypass large, rigid defenses. A future where, we can't see it, was not a temporary glitch, but a permanent feature of the battlefield. The Soviet Union, already economically strained and politically unstable, simply didn't have the time or resources left to catch up. The Berlin Wall had fallen in 1989. Within months of Desert Storm, the USSR itself would dissolve. In that sense, the invisible bombers over Baghdad were more than just a tactical success. They were a technological epitaph. For the Soviet system, the game was effectively over. Picture Mikhail again years later, reading about the F-117 in a newspaper, seeing new photos, seeing foreign analysts calmly explain the theory behind stealth. He would recognize it immediately. Not just the shape, but the feeling. This, he might think, is what we felt that night. It wasn't just fear. It was the realization that the world had quietly turned a corner, and his side had missed the turn. So, what have we really been looking at this entire time? Not just a strange aircraft and a wild story from the Gulf War. We've been looking at how a single overlooked paper in a Moscow library helped invent stealth, how a small group inside an American black project turned that math into a machine that should not fly, but did, how that machine slipped through the most sophisticated Soviet, designed air defenses and shattered a military doctrine built over 40 years. And most importantly, how the invisible bombers over Baghdad marked the moment when one Cold War superpower realized, in the most painful way possible, that it wasn't just behind in numbers. It was behind in the kind of thinking that the future would demand. If you're fascinated by stories like this, where math, politics, and human fear collide in dark bunkers and secret deserts, this channel is where those stories live. So hit that like button if this episode pulled you in. subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss the next deep dive. Lan, tell us in the comments which part of this story hit you hardest. Was it the moment the bunker went dark, the Soviet paper that came back to haunt Moscow, or the idea of a plane that is, by design, unflyable, until a computer teaches it how? Because here's the thing, the F-117 was just the beginning. If an angular, faceted, first-generation stealth jet could do this in 1991, what do you think the second and third generations can do today? In the next episode, we're going to look at how stealth evolved, from the Nighthawk to flying wings, to modern designs that don't just hide from radar, but play with it. You've heard the story of the first ghost. Now, get ready to meet its descendants. This is Cold War Impact. Thanks for watching.